Hello, everyone. Welcome back again to Introduction to Anthropology. I am Adam Dunstan, and this is week 3, Cultures and Social Groups, subtitled The Key to All of It, because it really is. Because whether we are talking about archaeology, looking into the past, or cultural anthropology, looking at the present, or even biological anthropology, looking at human bodies and their variety, and linguistic anthropology, all the different types of anthropology ultimately have as a very important and key concept the idea of cultures, of our shared ways of living and thinking and acting. So that is going to be the topic today, as well as the idea of humans as an inherently social organism. So to start us off in thinking about that, I want to do a bit of a silly thing with you, which is go on a field trip, but it's not a real field trip, partly because this is a YouTube video. So instead it's a metaphorical field trip. I want you to pretend for a minute that you are on an airplane. And that airplane, this is purely hypothetical, but the airplane has to do an emergency landing onto a deserted island. Okay, so you're stuck on a deserted island and you don't know exactly where you are, unlike this well laid out flight plan that I've got here. For some reason, you have no idea where you are, but you're on this deserted island. I used to do this activity with students in my face-to-face class, and I would ask them, okay, break into teams now and come up with your list of what actions you would take to survive. Now, living here in Alaska now, when I've tried to do this activity, it goes very different. People here tend to have a lot more survival skills than when I lived in Texas. But nonetheless, whether I'm doing this with Alaskans or where I used to teach in Texas, as people develop their list of actions they would take, inevitably they come up with things like, well, we would split up into teams and groups within the larger group and go out and divvy out tasks and figure out who's going to get water and who's going to get food, right? Or we would develop a tool to go hunting, like we would use a sharpened stick, right? Or maybe if there was a pocket knife or something in somebody's backpack, I guess that's unlikely. But anyways, they would have all these ideas of sort of technology they might be able to use from their backpacks or that they might be able to craft out of materials in their environment. And so I would have them write this list on the board of all the steps they would take to survive. And then what I would do is I would have us cross out all the ones that involved society, that involved a group of people working together, right? Which that usually crossed out most of the items. And then I would also have them cross out everything that involves culture, a shared way of thinking, a shared way of doing things. So, for example, if somebody says, well, I'm going to craft a spear, well, did you like invent the concept of a spear, like just out of nowhere? You're just a genius and you came up with spears? No, you've obviously seen a spear before. You've been taught the concept of a spear, whether through TV or through actually using one or whatever it is. And so you've got that idea from your culture, right? So all in all, once you cross out everything that's a social activity or that's a cultural thing that you learned from somebody else, people's list of how they could survive is pretty darn low. It's basically really, really basic stuff. And it illustrates an important point, which is that although humans, like any animal, do have a certain amount of instincts, the amount of things that we do purely instinctual is very, very small. Whereas the amount of things that are shaped by our culture and by our upbringing, as well as our own individual personalities, is very, very large. Um, you can tell that in part by the huge variety of niches that humanity fills. This is just more about that. If you look at humanity, we're really kind of the most audacious animal around. If you look at us, we are not not bad. We're not the most impressive thing on the block. I would give that to maybe bears, gorillas. We're certainly not as strong as them. We don't have claws. We've long ago abandoned those. We do have canine teeth, but for most of us, they're not very impressive. Our sense of smell is good. It's not great compared to most other mammals, right? There's a lot of ways in which, as a species, we're not that impressive. There are some things we do that are impressive. We are very, very good at long distance running, which is a surprisingly useful skill if you're running around in the savannah as an early Homo sapien trying to take food from one location to another. So we also have binocular vision, opposable thumbs. We got some cool stuffs going on. But ultimately, if you were looking at us purely as a physical animal, right? If you were to try to imagine this kind of a being, but take away all the culture, take away all the society stuff, and just think of them as a physical being, you would expect that they would not be the most impressive animal on the block. And yet, our species numbers now well into the billions, or indeed around 8 billion, close to 8 billion. And we are found on essentially every environment on Earth other than Antarctica. And of course, even there, we have a foothold with scientific community down there. So obviously, you're getting what I'm trying to get at here, which is that what makes humans so incredible is not any sort of physical impressiveness, although again, we have a few things that are kind of cool, but the fact that we've been able to adapt to 1,000 different environments because of social groups and because of culture. If I were to ask you, what's the natural sort of like niche, the natural job of a cheetah? You would say the natural niche of a cheetah, the natural job of a cheetah is to run down antelopes through stealth and quick bursts of speed. If I was to say, okay, what is the niche of, let's say, a moose? You would say, okay, well, moose are these creatures that are tall enough that they can get through snowy or marshy areas, and they eat a variety of kinds of browse, and especially during the winter, they eat a lot more woody vegetation. Okay, cool. Humans, by contrast, have 1,000 different niches depending on where we are, right? You go down to Bali and we're doing terraced rice agriculture, where you're able to use the floods and control through channels where the floods go so that you can grow artificial ponds to grow rice. If you go over to the Hawanzi group in Southern Africa, you have people that are using long distance running skills to eventually tire out antelopes and giraffe and different things and kill them. If you are up here over on Kodiak Island 500 years ago, people are whaling with poison spears and taking out huge whales as a result, and also collecting berries and a variety of plants and other animals too. If you go a little bit north of here into traditional Athabascan lands, about 200 years ago, 300 years ago, people were building huge fences that allowed them to drive caribou towards a certain location so that they'd be easier to hunt. My point is, humans have developed a million different ways to adapt to the world, but all of them have two things in common. Number one, our survival strategies always involve us working together as groups. Everything I just mentioned required you to work together as a group to obtain food. And all of them also involved people developing a technique, passing it on to their kids make it a little better, pass it on to their kids, and they keep improving it over time, right? Something like that rice agriculture thing with the stepped terrace farms that I mentioned a second ago, that doesn't appear overnight. That's hundreds of generations of people perfecting the technique. So humans then, as a biological organism, we are fundamentally social and cultural beings. We are fundamentally group animals. And our groups are fascinating, right? Unlike most organisms, our groups can number in the millions or even up to 1 billion. We have countries where everybody would think of themselves as, okay, I am Chinese or I am from India. And that's like 1 billion people, right? So the size of human groups can be incredible, or they can be as small as like 30 people in a village. Uh, the variety is crazy, but the fundamental theme there is we are group organisms. So I want to talk about that then, and I want to go a little bit further with it. I've got a slide here that says toothbrush, traffic lights, taxes, and trends. And what I'm getting at there is that a lot of what allows us not just to get food, which is what I was talking about a minute ago, but to generally get by in our daily lives, a lot of what allows us to get by in our daily lives is essentially agreed upon ways of acting as a group, right? So for example, we've all agreed that red means stop and green means go. And if there's a white line or two white lines in the middle of the road, it means that you don't ever cross over that line. And if it's a dashed line, you can use it to pass as long as you're following certain rules, or depending. Anyways, that is all stuff we've just decided, right? If you were to take somebody and plop them down in the middle of this and they'd never seen this system of regulating traffic, they would have no idea what it is. But because we have this culturally agreed upon expectations of what a red light means, what a green light means, et cetera, we're able to manage the flow of millions of people every single day. And yes, there are crashes and accidents, but the percentage compared to the percentage of people that just go along their merry way is quite small, right? So that is the power of culture, to coordinate millions of people in a shared way of life that allows daily life to sort of keep going. doesn't mean it's necessarily good. There are all sorts of things that are cultural and that people might even do on a daily basis that could be very harmful. But the point is that culture gives people sort of a set of norms, a sort of expectations of how our group of people behaves. And they may be very different individually. For example, the two people that meet at an intersection of a red light and a green light, one of them may have a Trump bumper sticker and one may have a Kamala Harris bumper sticker. One may be atheist, one may be a devout Christian, and yet another person that pulls up to the intersection, a devout Hindu. They might have all sorts of different variations within their culture, but we still all get what a red light is, and we all still get what a green light is. Culture makes that possible, sort of a shared vision of how the world is supposed to operate. So all of that to say, you really can't understand anything about human beings if you don't understand the socio-cultural context in which they're in. If you're trying to understand what it is that makes humanity tick, you have to think of them first and foremost as group beings, as beings of culture. If you purely try to get at it from the perspective of individuals and how their brains work, you're missing a huge, huge, huge portion of the puzzle, right? And you're never going to fully understand humans that way. We have to put humans in their socio-cultural context. More on that in the next video.